Well, this is very new for me. This is my first time making a buying guide, and it only makes sense. This is something that I've been wanting to make for a very long time, considering the fact that I'm constantly buying video games, collecting video games, surfing eBay, Mercari, garage sales, yard sales, etc. So today we're going to be making a buying guide for the Nintendo DS. We're going to be going all the different, hardware revisions, chargers, games, all that. One thing worth noting is that we will not be going over prices because I don't want this video to become dated. I don't want to throw out a number and be like, oh, this is how much each model cost, because in a year or 2 or 5 from now it could easily become outdated. I want this to be a video that you could watch today, tomorrow, in 5 or 10 years and still have it be relevant. So let's not dilly-dally. I want to respect your time. First things first, let's go ahead and go over all the different hardware revisions. So you have the first hardware revision, that being the original fat model. Unfortunately, I do not own that one, so I'll just have to simply put a picture on screen so you can see it. It was, as the name implies, a rather fat model. The standard color you're going to find online is silver, though there is also other colors like blue, for example. One thing worth noting, if you do decide to go with this model, is that it is prone to scratching quite easily, and overall, I don't know if I can necessarily recommend this model. It doesn't have an adjustable brightness, and furthermore, the screen is rather dim. However, if you have a Game Boy Advance SP already, it might be worth looking into this, maybe, since it shares the same charger with that, but that's the only thing I can really think of. The buttons do feel really nice on that system, I will say. It also has a Game Boy Advance slot, and unlike the DS Lite, which was a later revision, which we're going to get to, the Game Boy Advance slot actually goes in the entire way into the system, whereas with this, if you would put a Game Boy Advance cartridge into a DS Lite, for example, it would stick out a little something like that. Obviously, that's not a GBA cartridge, that's just like the dust cover, but yeah, when you put a GBA thing in here, it just kind of sticks out a bit, whereas on the original model, that doesn't happen. Otherwise, I wouldn't say stay away from that one, because, even me, since I'm a collector, I do want to get that original fat model, the original silver at some point. But it's not necessarily going to be like a main daily driver, and it costs about the same as the other models we're going to be talking about. In some instances, you might find it for a bit cheaper, but it's within the same like $5 to $10 margin of error. So if anything, I'd recommend going for one of the later models, which we're going to get to next. So next, we'll go ahead and talk about the DS Lite, which in my opinion is the definitive Nintendo DS, just because, there's a few different things that, factor into this, right? First things first. The Game Boy Advance cartridge slot, right? Like, even if you haven't had a DS before, but say you had a Game Boy Advance before, already you're gonna have so many games that you're gonna be able to play with this cartridge right here, and furthermore, there is some Nintendo DS games, not this one in particular, but like Guitar Hero, for example, where you need that Game Boy Advance slot because the attachment that comes with it so you can actually play the songs goes into this cartridge slot so you can do it. And if you have one of the later models like the DSi or DSi XL, which we'll talk about later, unfortunately, you literally cannot play those games. Now, sure, there is some games that are exclusive to DSi, which is another thing we'll get to later. This is how my videos work. I bring up one thing and we get back to it later. But, again, we'll kind of do the pros and cons by the end just to kind of sum everything up to kind of refresh your memory and everything. Don't worry. Otherwise, this system does actually have an adjustable brightness, and though it does not have the brightest screen out of all the Nintendo DSs, it is more than bright enough. Like, if you put it on the brightest setting, it's gonna blind you, and on the later models where it can get even brighter, it will literally blind you. So like literally, the DS, it's more than bright enough. Even if you're sitting outside and the bright's on, like setting it to the brightest setting, you're going to be able to see it just fine. Furthermore, this also has the best battery out of all the DS systems, even out of the later DSi systems, just because those were pushing more power, therefore they were eating up more battery. Whereas the DS Lite struck that perfect balance. But is that would that be the past tense of Shrike? Would it be Shriked the perfect? Yeah, Shriked the, sorry, I said stroke. That's disgusting. Where the DS Lite struck the perfect balance between being simple enough in terms of its hardware and its OS and everything like that, but also still being powerful enough to run everything. So just to recap everything so far, the DS and the DS Lite are going to be about the same price, and if you're going to go between one of these two, I'd recommend going for the DS Lite because it has a brighter screen, adjustable brightness, and it still has the GBA slot, not to mention the fact that it has the best battery out of all the DSs. Now let's go ahead and move on to the later model, which is, I could see it going either between the model we're about to talk about, the one after that, or the DS Lite. It really just comes down to your preference and what you're looking for out of the system. But next up is the DSi. Now, this one does have more features right out of the box, whereas the original DS and the DS Lite, it's all about the games. You turn it on, you pick your DS game, your GBA game, you can mess around in PictoChat or mess around in the settings, And that's about it. There's literally nothing to it, whereas the DSi, as you can see, it literally has a back camera there, and when you open it up, there's a camera there on the front, and so, you know, similar to the DS Lite and the DS did have a microphone, but this one has more functionality to where, rather than for the DS and the DS Lite where you can only use the microphone in game, on the DSi, there was actually a lot of features built into the OS, again, where the original DSs were rather simple in terms of their, you know, UI and software and all that. There was way more features. You could turn it on, and you had a menu that essentially resembled the Wii in a way, and you could mess with pictures, you could, you know, mess how audio recordings sound, make like videos and stuff like that. All around, I would say that the DSi feels more like a modern system, whereas the DS and the DS Lite are still just, you know, way more nostalgic. As I had mentioned before, the screen is also a lot brighter here, and the buttons do feel a bit different. These ones are a bit more clicky. They're very akin to like what you would see on the Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons, like, you know how clicky those are. That's basically like exactly how the DSi buttons are to a slightly lesser extent, though it is also worth noting, as I had mentioned before, that the DSi does not have a Game Boy Advance slot. So if you want to play Guitar Hero, for example, which for somebody like me, you know, I'm a 2000s baby, grew up during the early to mid 2000s when Guitar Hero was all the rage. Yeah, you know, I want my Guitar Hero. I want to be able to play with my Guitar Hero grip on my DS, but unfortunately, you just cannot do that no matter what you do on the DSi. The charger here is also proprietary, which is something I forgot to mention about the DS Lite. With the DS original, like I had said, it shares the charger with the Game Boy Advance SP, whereas for the DS Lite, it has its own proprietary charger. It does not share a charger with any other of the other DSs, whereas the DSi, it has the same charger that you're going to see on this, the DSi XL, the 3DS, the 2DS, and basically every DS after this. There is also 3 exclusive DSi games. You got System Flaw, some Hair Salon game, and Photo Showdown. If you're going to get one of the exclusive games, I would say to go for Photo Showdown, just because it's one of those games where, for me, you know, even though it's a bit of a gimmicky concept, I've always had a soft spot for it. It's really fun. It's a fun little turn-based RPG. I'd recommend checking that one out at least. And there is a lot of exclusive software in terms of DSiWare. However, since the DSiWare shop has been shut down, you're not really going to be able to get that stuff officially, so I'll leave it up to you to figure out how to actually get that stuff. I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but in these buying guides that I do plan to keep doing in the future, I'm not ever going to be talking about like modding or anything like that, just because that kind of defeats the purpose of, you know what I'm going for here, where it's just like a buying guide by an official means, and furthermore, I don't want Nintendo to be knocking on my door tomorrow. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd love to hear from Nintendo, but, you know, not for the wrong reasons. You know, when you're talking to Nintendo, you definitely don't want to be talking to them through the context of being on the other side of a courtroom. And then after the DSi, as I mentioned before, we had the DSi XL, which has no new features. It is literally the exact same thing, just bigger. And another thing worth mentioning probably about the DS is that all the styluses are different. The DS Lite has its own stylus, the original DS has its own stylus, and the DSi has its own stylus. So they all do basically fit inside of the slots. It's not that big of a deal. We're talking literal like millimeters of difference in size, but it's just worth mentioning if you're like me and you get kind of like pedantic and picky about those things. So just as a quick overall recap, just in case I lost you, because I wouldn't blame you if that was the case, the original DS, it does not have an adjustable brightness, it has the darkest screen, it has an okay battery, but overall, probably not the system I would recommend, simply because the DS Lite did everything the DS did, literally one for one. It is the exact same system inside, except better. It's in a subjectively better form factor depending on what you think. Personally, I just think that this one looks sleeker. In terms of comfortability, I feel like both the Lite and the Fat are very comfortable systems either way, but I feel like in terms of sleekness, I'd say that the DS Lite just looks a bit more sleek and sexy. And furthermore, again, it has the best battery, it has way more color varieties as well if you're into getting different colors like pink and red and black and blue, and you know, the list goes on and on there. Different shades of blue, like 5 different shades of blue and navy and ice blue and all this. The DS and the DS Lite also both have the Game Boy Advance slot, whereas the DSi, unfortunately, it does not have that Game Boy Advance slot, but it has, you know, the highest brightness available. The screens are also, you know, a bit better, just like a bit higher quality in terms of like overall sharpness and color fidelity. They're basically the exact same across this and the DSi, DSi XL, the DS Lite and all that. Like, they're basically the exact same in terms of like color, you know, fidelity and depth, but there's just something about the DSi screens that look very crisp and sharp with the pixels and such, even though the resolutions are the exact same across all of the devices. Unfortunately, this one's battery isn't as good as the DS Lite, but the DS Lite's battery is ridiculous. We're talking like I like double digits of hours. I don't know how the battery in the DS Lite is so good, but it lasts for a really long time. This is still gonna get you a good like 6 to 8 hours, something like that if I had to guess. Similar to the DS Lite, there's also a lot of color varieties available for this. Is there as many as the DS Lite? I don't think so, but there's still a ton available. Pink, blue, red, all these, you know, different variations you can go for. Different types of red. You got like glossy red, and then there's like matte reds and such, and then again, the one thing I would just, you know, really hone in on is the fact that it doesn't have a GBA slot, because not only does that mean that you can't play GBA games unless you mod the system, but even if you do mod the system, it completely kills any chance of you playing some of the DS games that do require that GBA slot, which isn't many, but is still enough to be like, hey, it's worth considering. And as I had mentioned before, all of the DSs are basically within the same price range. You're all going to find them within that same $5 to $10 margin of error. The only exception being the DSi XL, which usually goes for about 10 to 20-ish more, maybe at best. And it's one of those things where even if the prices do happen to climb because of the holidays or one thing or another for a bit, the price gap between them always stays the same. Like the DSi XL has always been slightly more expensive as the other ones, whereas the rest have always been within a similar price range. So overall, the DS systems are rather cheap when talking about gaming devices. Now that we've kind of given you a brief overview of the consoles, I feel like now would be a good time to talk about the games. Now, I do have all the games that we're going to be talking about physically. I just was too lazy to grab all of them and bring them over here, if I'm going to be honest, because I already had to bring enough over here with the devices and chargers and such. So, yeah, so the only one that I'm going to be showing off physically is New Super Mario Bros., just so you kind of have an idea of like what DS games look like, what they're supposed to look like on the inside and on the back, just for when you're, you know, scrolling and such, because I feel like that's really important to know, like, hey, is this case legit? Is the game legit? This, that, or the other. So, first game we're going to talk about is New Super Mario Bros. Unfortunately, I also won't be able to show any gameplay on screen for any of these games, because Nintendo has been seemingly a little picky about that again recently. Not exactly sure why. I've heard some things in the news, just I don't want to risk anything. But New Super Mario Bros., which isn't exactly new at this point since the game released in 2006, is, you know, it's your traditional lovely 2D Mario platformer. You're going to be running, jumping through the levels, hitting question blocks, getting mushrooms, grabbing fire flowers, and it's a very charming game. There's 6 worlds that you can go through by default, but then there's 2 that you can unlock for a total of 8 worlds, and of course there's all sorts of different challenges and secret levels and toad houses and such that I won't spoil. I'll let you find for yourself as you play the game, but I would highly recommend this one. This is one of my favorite games on the DS, but also just one of my favorite Mario games and one of my favorite 2D platformers in general. And before we go on, we'll go ahead and just kind of like show you how a DS game should look. So you have the cover here. It says Nintendo DS on the side. They're always going to have like this label here. And if you're looking for a DSi game, it's going to be just like this, except it's going to say DSi. So, you know, you'll be good there. There's the cover. That's how the back should look. Just, you know, very standard for the back of a game. On the side, that's how it should look with the DS thing up there. Got the New Super Mario Bros. Logo there. And then when you open up the case, for most DS games, you're going to have like the, you know, the GBA slot thing up here. Then you got the game down here. Again, your mileage may vary on this, depending on like when the game released. And then the manual will be over here. Thankfully, you know, mine is CIB, so I got all the manuals and stuff like that and cool little slips. If you like New Super Mario Bros., check out these other great games. DK, Jungle Climber, Zelda Phantom Hourglass, Mario Kart DS, man. So many fantastic games for the DS, but yeah, so New Super Mario Bros. If you're gonna pick up any game, I would say that this is like the definitive game where it's like, when I think DS, this is the first game that comes to mind, so I'd highly recommend picking this one up. Now, in total, we're going to be talking about 10 games. That was the first one, obviously, and these aren't like, oh, the 10 best DS games of all time or the 10 best selling. These are just 10 that I wanted to point out, so then you had a variety of games to choose from. You have some puzzle games, some visual novel games, some more kiddie games, some platformer, some racing games, just a bit of variety, while also picking games that I feel like really show the strengths of the DS, both in casual senses and in more advanced gamer senses. So the first one we talked about, again, being New Super Mario Bros. Next up, I want to talk about Mario Kart DS. If you haven't played Mario Kart DS before, that either means that you didn't have any friends when you were younger, which, hey, that's completely okay, because for me, it was vice versa, where, you know, some people don't have friends as kids, but then they get friends later on. For me, I had plenty of friends when I was younger, but now I'm an adult and I don't have any friends, so it's all good. Mario Kart DS, though, was the first handheld, truly 3D Mario Kart game. Sure, we had, you know, Mario Kart on the GBA, and it was sort of pseudo 3D, but no. This is full 3D models and everything like that, and arguably, to some people, is the best Mario Kart game of all time. For me, I can't choose a favorite Mario Kart just because they're all so great in their own ways. Like, I love Double Dash for certain reasons, I love 8 and 7 for certain reasons, I love DS for certain reasons, but I would say that is definitely the most nostalgic one for me, for sure. Next up, I want to recommend Scribblenauts, which is another really nostalgic game for me. It's a lot of fun, but this game is so cool. So essentially, if you guys have ever played the game or heard of Drawn to Life, it's sort of like that, but different. It's like a similar concept to where in Drawn to Life, you draw things and, oh yeah, they come to life. They become a part of the game. But Scribblenauts, instead of that, you write things. So you know, you have this notepad, you pull up and you say, okay, I want a gun. You just type gun, click the enter button, and a gun will just fall from the air and your character can run around with it. Or I want a fire truck. You put in fire truck, a fire truck will spawn. You want a tree, that'll spawn. And there's like literally hundreds, if not thousands of objects that you can summon in. And it's just this incredible sandbox. I remember when I was younger, I had this time where I was like, okay, you know what? I want to set up like a literal like game inside of this game. So I created a tower defense where I built up like an entire station. I had like guns and turrets and like other, you know, like police officers alongside of me. And then I spawned in a bunch of zombies and monsters right outside of this building that I summoned in. And I was like, all right, let's see how long everybody can survive before we all just, you know, die. And it was absolute chaos, and I loved every second of it. And that's the best part. It isn't just like, oh, it's some one-off thing, or, you know, because there is like a story mode you can go through, but there is also just like, you know, like the sandbox element too, where you can just go in and it's like, you know, it isn't even like scripted or anything like that. Like, again, there is single player missions which are kind of scripted, but you have that sandbox where it doesn't have to be scripted. You can just do stuff like that, and it's just a part of the game. Like, it was so advanced for the time, and even now it's like mind-blowing. Next up, I wanted to highlight Neo: The World Ends With You, which is a game that I'm not going to spend too much time talking about, but it is an absolutely fantastic RPG, which has been ported to other consoles like, you know, the Nintendo Switch and PlayStation, for example, but I truly do feel like it is at home on the Nintendo DS with the way that it utilizes both of the screens. And you're going to be like, you know, when you're in combat, for example, like you'll be bouncing between the top and the bottom screen, and the story truly just... it resonated with me in a way that I literally cannot explain in words, and I feel like a lot of you will be able to resonate with this story as well. So again, this is one that I really don't want to say too much about just because it is an absolutely fantastic game. You know, with it being an RPG, it is definitely a bit longer. It isn't like Persona lengths, like 100+ hours, but I want to say it'll take you maybe like a, you know, a couple dozen hours. It is an absolutely fantastic game, and I cannot recommend it enough. And even if you don't plan to buy a DS, make sure you get on one of the other consoles at least, just so you can at least experience that story. It is absolutely fantastic. Next up, I want to recommend Pokemon Black and White. I mean, if you played Pokemon before, or if you've been thinking about getting into the series, I would say that, if you've played Pokemon before, there was a chance that you've already played this game, unless you're a younger gamer that wasn't there when these games released, in which case, I pity you if you do decide to pick up these games, because they are rather expensive nowadays, which does kind of tie into the modding thing, where it's like, hey, you can either fork out all the money to get these games, or you can maybe invest in some other things, which we're not going to talk about in this video, because again, I don't want Nintendo knocking on my door tomorrow. There is cheaper ways to acquire these games, but, you know, if you want to get it officially, you know, that's always an option too. But whether you are a younger gamer that maybe just simply missed that era of Pokemon Black and White, in which case, I kind of feel bad for you, because that was a really special era for Pokemon. Just, I don't know, again, it's super nostalgic for me, but the love in the air when Pokemon Black and White released, everybody picking up the game, and even though we already had a Pokemon generation on the DS, I don't know, Black and White was just that era where it was like, it was that point where everybody had a DS, everybody was there playing it, you know what I mean? Like, you couldn't escape it at school, the library, the grocery store. You always saw a kid playing Pokemon Black and White, it seemed like, on their Nintendo DS. But even without that social factor, it's still an absolute blast to just play by yourself, obviously. Like, even to this day, I constantly go back, pop in my copy of Pokemon Black, just because that's the version I went with, and I absolutely love that game. There's also Pokemon Black 2 and White 2 if you want to get those as well, but yeah, you can't go wrong with either version. Just an absolutely fantastic Pokemon generation. Next up, I wanted to recommend LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga. As I mentioned before, I wanted to have a variety of games on here, and this is, you know, it's like a classic LEGO game where it's like sort of like a 3D puzzle action platformer of sorts. It heavily leans into like the collectathon side of things, as you're collecting all these different studs and mini kits and trophies and going through the levels and replaying through the events of Star Wars episodes 1 through 6. Star Wars: The Complete Saga, it is one of my favorite LEGO games and one of my favorite games of all time. Whether we're talking about the console version or the DS version, I put tons of hours into that game back in the day, and 100%ed it multiple times across multiple save files. I love LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga. I cannot recommend it enough. Next up, we're going to talk about Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, which is unlike the console counterparts. I've also talked about this game many times on the channel before. Unlike the console versions, which is, you know, like a 3D beat-em-up adventure game of sorts, you know, level-based. You go through each level playing as each of the Spider-Man. It's sort of the same thing on the Nintendo DS, where, you know, it is still technically level-based, and you're playing as the different Spider-Man. But instead, here, instead of it being like a 3D adventure game, beat-em-up, whatever, it's actually essentially like a 2D Metroidvania on DS, and it is one of my favorite Metroidvanias of all time. It is so well done. It is such an amazing game. It is super addictive. It's one of those games where you're going to pick it up, and I promise you, you're probably not going to put it down until you beat it. It's not a very long game. I mean, it might still take you like a day or two to get through, just because there is a lot to chew on there if you decide to explore all the environments, go for all the upgrades, and really see things through, play through the different modes and challenges you can unlock. And man, if you do try to go through 100% of the game and, you know, play through all the challenges and all the different modes, like the arcade mode and the boss rush mode, and then play around with the alternate costumes and do all the unlockables, yeah, you'll definitely get a good couple dozen hours out of this game. It is an absolutely fantastic experience. There's even like cutscenes and stuff like that in the game and a bunch of dialogue, and I cannot recommend it enough. An absolutely fantastic and very nostalgic game for me. The next stuff I want to talk about is Kirby Squeak Squad. You know, it's a classic Kirby adventure. If you played Return to Dreamland or just normal Dreamland on the Game Boy before, you know what you're getting into. It's a 2D Kirby platformer, but, you know, it's like one of the main ones that was released for the DS, and I've always just really loved this one. You know, you're going after the Squeak Squad, as the name would imply, but there's just something about Kirby. Every time that I play a Kirby game, there's an undeniable charm to it, between the music and just, you know, just how happy and fluffy and cute that Kirby is doing all the little dances and such. There's just so much charm there, and Kirby Squeak Squad captures that perfectly, and it does have some pretty cool utilizations of the, you know, the dual screen and touchscreen setup, so I can highly recommend Kirby Squeak Squad. Absolutely love that game. Next up, I wanted to highlight Animal Crossing Wild World, which was like the Animal Crossing game for the Nintendo DS, and I absolutely adore this game. It is basically, it's very similar to what we got on the GameCube with the first Animal Crossing. It's basically just like that in terms of like the graphical fidelity, at least, you know, just the aesthetic of it, where it's a bit more low poly, yet it's still like actually 3D. And Animal Crossing Wild World is one of those games where I can always go back to it, and even beyond the nostalgic charm of it all, it is just so relaxing and so much fun going into that game, going into that world. You know, you're talking to all the different villagers in the town, carrying out all your tasks, getting into the routine of checking back every day to see what's in the shop, what all you need to take care of. I absolutely adore Animal Crossing Wild World, and despite the fact that we've had many Animal Crossing games since then, like New Horizons and New Leaf and all that, I still feel like there's plenty of charm and reason to go back and play some of these older games, like the first one on GameCube, or specifically Wild World here, like we're talking about on the Nintendo DS. It is an absolutely fantastic game. It's one of those games where if I'm having a bad day, or, you know, it doesn't matter if I'm having a good day, bad day, sad day, whatever it is. If I'm in a good mood, it'll just make me feel even better. If I'm stressed out, it'll calm my anxiety, and if I'm sad, it'll make me smile again. I love Animal Crossing Wild World. It is for some reason I can't say that title today. Animal Crossing Wild World. I don't know why it's so hard for me to say, but fantastic game. And finally, I wanted to talk about one that's very different from literally any of the other games we talked about here, and that is Ace Attorney Trilogy. Now, this is the first time that this game was actually available in America. It was technically available on the Game Boy Advance, but only in Japan, but then finally on the DS, we got the whole trilogy here on DS, and surprisingly, even though it was a GBA game, it utilizes the touchscreen and dual screen setup very well. Now, again, this is like a visual novel of sorts, but it isn't like your typical visual novel where you'll just be like reading it for most of the time. It's actually very interactive and can get very intense, especially once you're in like the court hearing sessions and just hitting the button, objection. I'm telling you, like when you're actually there in the moment and you're trying your hardest to win that case and prove that your client is innocent, oh my goodness, those, like, the amount that my heart races is equivalent to when you get that last second kill in D&D. When you know when the enemy is on the bomb, they're just about to defuse it, and you're about to lose the last round, and that last round is going to be the one that makes you lose the game. Last second, you throw that tomahawk, you don't know if it's gonna land, your heart's pounding, it's like, if this misses, my team's gonna hate me, we're gonna lose, but then it smacks him right in the skull, and you just get that immediate feeling of satisfaction. That's how it feels to win a case in Ace Attorney Trilogy. I am not even kidding. This game is absolutely fantastic, and again, even though it's a visual novel, it is very interactive and a very innovative spin on the classic visual novel formula, and even though it was a GBA game originally, it is absolutely fantastic and quite at home on the DS and the DS Lite and DSi and DSi XL. The game is also available on other platforms nowadays, like the Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox, but again, we're talking about the DS today, so that's another game that I can highly recommend. Now, beyond that, that is 10 games, technically 11, because we talked about Photo Showdown before for the DSi, so that's another recommendation. Then, again, there's all the DSiWare that you can look into on your own time and figure out how to get your hands on all that, because that's a whole wormhole, as well as, some other things you can do with the DS and DS Lite to get some other games, but again, don't want to talk about all that just so Nintendo isn't knocking on my door tomorrow, because again, I'd love to hear from Nintendo, but not in a courtroom. You know what I mean? So just to do a very brief recap at the end of everything, the whole, the TLDW, didn't want to watch the video, just skipping to the end to get the quick rundown of everything. So the DS Fat, it doesn't have an adjustable brightness on the screen, and it's going to be the darkest screen of them all. The battery is okay. It also has a Game Boy Advance slot, so you can technically play GBA games on there. It is a very hefty system. Overall, though, it's not a system I'd say stay away from, because there is definitely charm and merit to having that system, and there's definitely enough value there to where I'd say, yeah, go ahead and pick it up. Like, if you get it for really cheap, like, yeah, definitely worth the purchase. It's not something you'd regret. But if you're gonna go between the DS or the DS Lite, I'd probably go for the DS Lite, simply due to the fact that it doesn't lose any of the features. It still has the Game Boy Advance slot, but it has a brighter screen, much better battery, and more color choices, so then you can choose, like, your favorite color. For me, personally, my favorite color is red, but I got the cobalt blue and black just because, this is the one that I had as a kid, and when I repurchased the DS recently, I was like, you know what? I want that nostalgic color I had as a kid, so this is the one that I went ahead and repurchased because, well, if you missed my videos talking about my whole history with DS Lites in the last couple of years, it's been a bit of a train wreck, but thankfully it's all coming together. This is like my third DS in the last 2 years. It's been a trip. But then you have the DSi, which technically does kind of have better screens, but the battery's also slightly worse, but not, it's not that bad. Again, still like 6 to 8 hours. The screens are also the absolute brightest that you're gonna get both on here and the DSi XL. Again, though, unfortunately, there is no Game Boy Advance slot, so not only can you not play Game Boy Advance games, but you're also not gonna be able to play any of the DS games that require a GBA slot, because like for games like Guitar Hero, it's not an option. You need that GBA slot. If you don't have it, sorry, you can't play the game. However, the DSi does also have its own exclusive games with Photo Showdown, System Flaw, and that one Hair Salon game, as well as all the DSiWare that you can go ahead and try to, figure out how to get on your own. Not going to talk about that here. Again, the DSi XL is also the exact same thing as this system, except slightly bigger. And then as far as the games are concerned, we talked about Photo Showdown, New Super Mario Bros., Mario Kart DS, Scribblenauts, Neo The World Ends With You, Pokemon Black and White, LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga, Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, Kirby Squeak Squad, Animal Crossing Wild World, and Ace Attorney Trilogy. Oh, and I guess one last thing we should talk about again is the chargers. Remember, the original DS shares a charger with the Game Boy Advance SP, whereas the DS Lite has its own proprietary charger that is not compatible with any other Nintendo systems. And then the DSi has its own charger, which is compatible with this, the DSi XL, and any DS I've released after. So the 3DS charger will work on a DSi. The DSi charger will work on a 3DS, and that also goes for like the 2DS and all that as well, obviously. So hopefully this helps y'all out there, and remember that all these prices, or all of these devices, are within the same price range, barring the XL, which is going to be a good 10 to 20 more in most cases, unless you get a steal at like a yard sale or garage sale, or just find like a good Facebook Marketplace or Mercari listing or something like that. But yeah, there we go. There's the DS buying guide. I hope that this helps somebody out there. But anyway, as always, a massive shout out and thank you to all the patrons and channel members. Thank you to all of you in the low baller tier, and an even bigger shout out and thank you to all of you in the big baller tier, Middle King and Big Daddy Manny. And the biggest shout out and thank you to all of you in the G tier, Rod and Vengeance and Luchi's Girl. Thank you guys so much. You guys are literal legends. I love you. Have an amazing day. Stay beautiful. I love you all. Peace.